San Francisco, 1906. Will Irwin, the journalist, had described it before the great calamity as the gayest, lightest-hearted, most pleasure-loving city of the Western continent.
Willie Britt, a fight manager, said, "I'd rather be a busted lamppost on Battery Street, San Francisco, than the Waldorf Astoria in New York." Rudyard Kipling said of this place, "San Francisco is a mad city, inhabited by perfectly insane people, whose women are of remarkable beauty." 400,000 people lived in this city. It was the 9th largest in the nation and the biggest in the West. Her people hailed from all over the world.
The President of the United States, Teddy Roosevelt, had come here in the spring of 1903. The Golden Gate Band played patriotic tunes. 50,000 school children cheered along Van Ness Avenue. Here, Mr. Roosevelt said, was the garden of the Lord and the West of the West.
In the West of the West, no one dreamed that San Francisco would soon be destroyed. The big quake of 1865 was just a distant memory, an amusing part of the city folklore. The city had practically burned to the ground 6 times in its early days, but this legacy, too, seemed safely in the past. The modern fire department was believed to be invincible. Many of the people who put their faith in the city were newcomers. 1/3 of the population had been born on foreign soil. Another third were the children of immigrants.
But when my father arrived here from Italy, he immediately got a job out on Fillmore Street. Our store was directly across from a bakery known as the Wycree Bakery. My mother arrived and found a job right near where my dad was working. He delivered the vegetables and she probably opened the back door. So that's how they met.
For the thousands of people who had disembarked at her wharves since the days of the gold rush, San Francisco was a magnet, a kind of promised land at the end of the rainbow. The first home for many on American soil was in the district called South of Market. Here were cheap wood tenements packed side by side like a house of cards. They would be the first to burn.
And them little streets were like colonies, really. All the Irish would settle in one little neighborhood, and the Dutch would settle in another neighborhood, and the Jews would settle in another neighborhood, and it was just a neighborly party. Everybody knew everybody else.
North of Market was a city within the city. 20,000 Chinese lived here.
Chinatown was very circumscribed in that it was only about 5 square blocks at that time. And we're not supposed to wander beyond Powell Street or Broadway on the north.
The Chinese ghetto was portrayed by the popular press as a barbaric and dangerous place, whose inhabitants worshiped pagan gods and indulged in fantastical vices. They ate strange foods and lived in a world cloaked in mystery and secrecy. On the inside, it was rather less romantic. A few were influential merchants, traders of silks, tea, and cheap human labor. Chinese laborers had started coming to California around the time of the gold rush. Gold Mountain Men, they were called, back home in Canton.
In San Francisco, they became workers in sweatshops, servants in the houses of the rich.
There was an invisible wall around Chinatown, a wall of racial prejudice.
Like my parents, the minute they landed in San Francisco from China, they just stayed in Chinatown and hardly ever get out of Chinatown. And one time, as a little boy, I wandered beyond Pacific Avenue, and I was beaten by some Italian boys. We knew that we were hated as a people, and so we generally try to stay aloof and be by ourselves.
Just a few minutes' walk and half a world away from Chinatown was the Palace Hotel. If you had the money, when you came to town, it was the place to stay. There was cut glass and marble in every corridor, and the incredible luxury of telephones and bathtubs in every room. There was also the most modern system of fire alarms and sprinklers.
The palace was built to be indestructible, but so was the Titanic.
Enrico Caruso, the famous opera singer, checked in here the night before the quake. He arrived with 54 steamer trunks and 50 self-portraits. That evening, Caruso stepped on stage to sing Don Jose in Carmen in San Francisco's Grand Opera House. If you couldn't get tickets to the opera, you could go to a gala costume carnival on skates where Miss Floria was crowned the Queen of the Rollers. In the district called the Barbary Coast, Nickelodeon showed scandalous moving pictures.
The coast was described by one indignant critic as
that sink of moral pollution, whose reefs are strewn with human wrecks. Here, blear-eyed men drink vile liquor, smoke offensive tobacco, and engage in vulgar conduct. Here are debauchery, disease, insanity, blasphemy, death, and hell, yawning to receive the putrid mass.
The men on the vice squad were ever vigilant, provided no one paid them not to be.
The mayor of San Francisco, Eugene Schmitz, was a front man for a corrupt city boss. The board of supervisors were content to receive their portion of the bribes. It was said they were so eager to better their position, they would eat the paint off a house.
This was City Hall.
But serious business was done in a little pub on the south side of Market. There, city politicians wheeled and dealed with those who needed favors and who could afford to pay for them.
They were all crooks. There was not a graft going on in them days, but people took it for granted. Everybody was grafting, so it didn't make any difference.
Schmitz and his cronies controlled the grandest city west of the Mississippi. A few dozen big hotels, offices, and banks were built of bricks, steel, and masonry. Most everything else was built of wood. San Francisco was a city waiting to burn. In 1906, the fire alarm, the response, the men and the equipment worked exactly the way they are portrayed in this early silent film.
Everything was automatic in the firehouse. The lights lit on the first strike of the bell. When the bell hit, the lights lit, that let go. The horses moved out under the collars. They snapped the collars. The driver's in the seat, and they're on the street. They were very fast.
But in spite of everything, in spite of San Francisco's 38 steam engine companies, 320 horses, and 584 firemen, who had already distinguished themselves as the city's homegrown heroes, the fire department would be hard-pressed to face the coming disaster. Just months before the earthquake, the National Board of Fire Underwriters stated in a report, San Francisco has violated all underwriting precedents by not burning up. That it has not done so already is largely due to the vigilance of the fire department, which cannot be relied upon to indefinitely stave off the inevitable.
The underwriters were about to be proven correct.
I was sleeping with my mother, and we thought it was the end of the world. We grabbed each other and pulled the covers over our heads and said, "This is the end of the world." And of course, we were scared to death.
We tried to stand up or do something, but we couldn't. We had to hang on for dear life because, as I said, the bed was flying around the room like a kite.
We tried to get out the back kitchen door onto our porch, but the chimney was broken down and the bricks were all against the door. We couldn't get out.
The quake hit San Francisco on Wednesday, April 18th, at precisely 12 minutes past 5 o'clock in the morning. But San Francisco wasn't the only place to get hit. For more than 200 miles along the San Andreas Fault, the crust of the earth slipped as much as 21 feet.
In San Jose, 8,000 people were homeless. Santa Rosa, a town of 7,000, was leveled. Trees were uprooted, fences curved, and in some places the earth flowed like water.
The quake had the impact of 6 million tons of TNT. Roughly 12,000 times the power of the atomic bomb exploded over Hiroshima. It remains the greatest natural disaster suffered by a North American city. Back in San Francisco, in the hours just after the quake, people wandered the streets in confusion. They had a singular hurt expression, remarked one observer, as if a good friend had suddenly wronged them. In some districts, people had no idea of the amount of damage that had been done. At Valencia Station, commuters waited impatiently for a train that would never come. Others, including Sam Fay, set out and walked to work.
But when I got there, the building stood like a drunken man. there, and the boss was there, and he says, Sam, would you mind standing here and watching the building? I says, it's no use watching it. I says, there's nothing to steal.
And there were people walking along, while some with wheelbarrows and their clothes, and some with the parrots and the canaries and what have you, anything they could carry. Even saw a guy rolling a barrel of whiskey along.
The number of people killed by the earthquake was not yet known or even guessed at, but it was clear that many of the worst casualties were in the neighborhoods south of Market. An estimated 30 to 80 people were crushed in the Valencia Hotel. Sam Fay was there.
And my mother kept telling the children, she says, I just have a feeling something happened to your father. And about a half an hour later, my mother sees the horse and wagon coming back. And driven by a strange person. So my mother knew then that that was the end. And she got the news that my father had been killed in the quake.
All over the Mission District, tenements folded in like pasteboard. From the wreckage, the cries of the trapped and injured could be heard. Those who survived could not be helped at the city's hospitals, which had sustained major damage in the quake. They were taken to the dance hall, where only last night Miss Floria had reigned as the roller queen.
I rode around with my father. I sat next to the driver on the driver's seat while he went around with his wagon looking for injured people who had not been found. And then we couldn't find Nellie after that. Nellie was the horse. And I was crying, where is Nellie? Where is Nellie? I never have learned what happened to Nellie. Never have learned.
What no one yet realized that morning was that the greatest tragedy of San Francisco was yet to unfold. The shock had snapped gas mains and toppled chimneys. 50 fires had started almost simultaneously. Although the city's telephone and central alarm system were destroyed, the individual fire brigades flew into action. But when they arrived on the scene, there was no water. The quake had broken almost all water mains coming into the city. Hydrants gave off a trickle and then ran dry. By 7 a.m., Mayor Schmitz had received status reports from the police and fire departments. Half a dozen fires were raging out of control. The mayor issued a proclamation stating that looters would be shot on sight. He also deputized special police whose actions would later be questioned. But the real power lay in the hands of Brigadier General Frederick Funston, the ranking Army officer in San Francisco. Funston commandeered automobiles and mustered troops. By 8 a.m., more than 1,700 men had arrived downtown. Their orders were to fight the fire, evacuate citizens, and prevent crimes.
But in the chaos that followed, the soldiers themselves were seen looting.
By the time troops were patrolling the streets, a good part of the city was in flames. At about 9 a.m., someone living in the Hayes Valley section kindled a fire to cook breakfast, innocent of the fact that the quake had damaged their chimney. This was the result. By noon, the Ham and Eggs fire, as it came to be known, was on its way to claiming a good part of the city.
The fire was really off and running by this time. So we found, we got down to a building that was going, and I can recall the chief who was in command yelling that the front of the building was coming out. The wall was collapsing. So a police officer decided that what we were doing down there wasn't the right, proper place to be.
It was believed many of the modern office buildings could withstand the flames. Most prominent, the Call Building, one of America's first skyscrapers. The call caught shortly after 10:30 a.m. It burned from the top down, its elevator shafts acting like flues. A few firemen were trapped on the upper floors and incinerated. About this time, Funston decided that the only hope of stopping the destruction was to use dynamite to create a fire break. At 1 p.m., a demolition team raced across Market to blow up the Monadnock building. The dynamite didn't work. All that was accomplished was to gut the interior of the building without bringing it down. Around the corner, a telegraph operator tapped out San Francisco's last message to the outside world.
2:30 p.m. The city practically ruined by fire. It's within half a block of us. The Call building is burned out entirely. The Examiner building just fell in a heap. Fire all around us, in every direction. Destruction by earthquake, something frightful. They are blowing up standing buildings that are in the path of flames with dynamite. No water. It's awful. I want to get out of here, or be blown up.
By 3 p.m., all telegraph lines were down. The city was isolated. Black powder and dynamite in the hands of inexperienced men often spread the fire rather than contained it.
All day long, you hear those dynamite going bing, bing, bang, bang, you know, all over. We always thought that was a big waste.
Next to the Monadnock was the palace where Caruso had spent the night. It withstood the flames until 3:30, when its special sprinkler system ran dry. Bartenders gave away bottles of fine wine, while National Guardsmen made a last-ditch effort to save the hotel. By 5 p.m., it was gone. Towards the afternoon, in certain parts of the city, the fire began to assume the characteristics of a firestorm.
The fire generated its own superheated wind, which caused spontaneous combustion.
A police officer described seeing a tongue of flame catch 3 people. It crackled like a million firecrackers, he said, and it was low to the ground. The flames seemed to pass through them. When it had gone, they were just balls of fire on the ground.
I remember seeing the fire, and, you know, all around it was smoke and everything. I remember looking at the sun or a moon. I don't remember whether the sun or moon. It was very red. And I remember having nightmares for a long time, remembering that all that redness in the moon or sun.
The fire, by late afternoon, had not only cut San Francisco off from the rest of the world, all lines of communication within the city were severed. Untrained deputies guarded banks and stores and took the law into their own hands. And soldiers patrolled the streets without their commanding officers. By nightfall, they had evacuated thousands of people.
Very soon, we had people knocking at our door and wanting to come in because they wanted people to get out, evacuate. And they were soldiers, and we had to get out. And they led us to Washington Square. And we were put up there and just assigned a place where we were to be in that section.
In the panic, soldiers barred many from saving their possessions hours before the fires reached their district.
One fellow says, "I'm going to take a hike over Market Street." And the soldier told him, "No, you're not. Nobody goes over Market Street." He says, "Who's going to stop me?" And the soldier says, "I will." because if you insist on going, I put a bullet through you.
Kids who were found looting were spared but publicly humiliated. They were forced to wear placards proclaiming their crime. Later, there would be persistent reports of shootings.
We got down to Broadway, and we heard somebody screaming up there. We walked back there, and the guys stopped running, and then of course the sentry was after and said, "Halt, otherwise I'll shoot." So he shot because he wouldn't halt, see?
Towards evening, a young newspaper reporter named Jack London surveyed the scene. "I knew it was all doomed," he wrote. "I walked for miles and miles through empty blocks. In the intense heat of the city, 2 troopers sat on their horses and watched. Surrender was complete." Thousands of people were huddled in open squares and parks while the fire raged unchecked through surrounding neighborhoods. Others watched from rooftops on Telegraph Hill, Russian Hill, and Nob Hill. By this time, it seemed to many there was nothing one could do but watch.
That night, we went up on top of the hill, my mother and I, and the whole city was burning. All south of Market and all along the waterfront was going. And she said to me, "Well, Will, you'll now be a pioneer of New San Francisco."
By 10 p.m., 250 city blocks had gone up in flame. South of Market was gone. The financial district was gone. Chinatown and the Barbary Coast would burn in the night. Reports began to reach the outside world, but it would take days before anyone, including the people who lived through it, could fully grasp what was happening. The headlines were part fact and part fiction. At dawn on April 19th, 24 hours after the earthquake, people who had lost their homes gathered in the streets. They seemed shell-shocked, unwilling or unable to go any further. Fortunes, factories, homes had all been swept away. Word got around that boats were taking people across the bay, and thousands began the long trek down Market Street to the ferry building.
My parents were able to hire a wagon, and we told them we wanted to go to the waterfront to take a boat over to Richmond. And the people demanded $20 for the ride, and that was quite a sum of money in those days because the average Chinese earned about $15 a month.
Others dragged trunks for miles or carried what they could on their backs. Messages to lost friends and relatives were chalked on the sides of buildings. Another reporter joined a stream of refugees. He wrote, "The street seemed dead. Not recently dead, but as if buried by some cataclysm of long ago and then dug out of the lava. Everywhere there was smoke, a contortion of stone, and a great silence." At the end of the long march, when people finally got to the ferry building, they were told they could only take what they could carry in their arms. By midday on April 19th, 250,000 were homeless. Over 3,000 were dead. But that was only the beginning. the city would burn for another 2 days. When the fire had burned itself out, William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate, arrived in what was left of San Francisco. He wrote,
"The wholesale district is destroyed, the manufacturing district, the financial district, and the waterfront section, all destroyed. I will not attempt any description of this scene. I do not believe that any words of mine could convey the slightest comprehension of the wreck and ruin. One must free the mind of the idea that there has been a fire in San Francisco, and must realize that there has been a fire of San Francisco. The whole city has gone up in one mighty blaze. The calamity seems overwhelming, and yet the people are not overwhelmed. Everything has been destroyed except that indomitable American pluck. In a month, there will be the beginning of a new and splendid city. In 3 years, it will be built and busy."
Finding loved ones would take days. Hundreds prayed they would not find them on the lists of the coroner, who now supervised the exhuming of hastily buried corpses in Portsmouth Square.
Food was short at first. Men scavenged for canned goods in the debris. Drinking water was a precious commodity. But even before the fire had burned out, supplies began to flood into the city. Military garrisons from Portland and Seattle sent 900,000 rations. A relief train arrived from Los Angeles. Hearst mobilized the resources of his newspapers and dispatched 12 trains from New York. Congress appropriated $1 million. Pledges of money came from cities, towns, and organizations all over the country. Soup kitchens cropped up amid the ruins, and everyone waited in line. Standing in bread lines, meat lines, soup lines, any kind of a line became the central activity of life. Everyone had to do it. Soldiers made sure nobody cheated. Some people joked about it. Others didn't think it was so funny. If you weren't standing in line, you were probably digging out, whether you liked it or not.
My father was standing on the curb right in front of the tents, and an army man came along, and my father was very courteous, and he said, "Good morning, Captain." And he says, "You working?" My father says, "No, sir." And he says, "Come with me."
Anybody they caught walking the streets was handed a shovel and followed the truck for 5 or 6 blocks until they picked up another guy. And then they let the last guy loose, and that's the way it went on until they worked till 6 o'clock maybe.
Within a week of the end of the fire, over 200,000 people found shelter in camps that had sprung up in the parks and squares of the city. Newspapers in San Francisco portrayed the life of the camps as something downright heroic. Here again was frontier man and woman, reduced to the bare necessities of life, toughing it out like the stalwart pioneers of '49.
We were cooking out in the front of the tents, you know, and the sand would blow into the beans, and it was an awful mess. The grit of that sand and the beans, I could never look a bean in the face for many years after that.
While people started life over again in the camps, the city, its government, utilities, and business struggled to get back on its feet. City Hall was devastated. The quake had exposed fake marble columns, evidence of underhanded deals with the contractors who had built it, at the inflated cost of $7 million. Mayor Schmitz and his paint-eating cronies would eventually be deposed. But for the time being, he still enjoyed an immense popularity, and it seemed that the quake had shocked him into his best behavior. With the grim memory of the ham and eggs fire, the mayor ordered everyone who still had a home to cook on the curb until inspectors could check their chimneys. Another big problem was sanitation. With sewers blocked, epidemics were feared. Rats flushed from the sewers could carry the bubonic plague. The main post office survived. Mail service resumed almost immediately. Letters were accepted without stamps or envelopes. Messages were scrawled on any available scrap of paper saying, "All safe, although lost all," and "Everything ruined, but don't worry, government is looking out." Insurance companies, having lost their records in the fire, set up a central bureau to sort out $170 million in claims. Businessmen waited for weeks for their safes to cool before discovering what remained. It was said that in many places the debris was not even allowed to cool, and bricks were pitched from lots when still as warm as muffins. Volunteers on the cleanup crews took up the refrain, "In the damnedest, finest ruins, I'd rather be a brick than live anywhere else but San Francisco." The great cleanup had begun. Thousands of standing walls were torn down. An estimated 6.5 billion bricks were carted away, or cleaned of mortar to be reused in new buildings. The demolition of the gutted Palace Hotel cost $90,000. For the whole city, just hauling away the mess and dumping it in the bay would cost $20 million. Railroad tracks were laid down streets all over town for debris trains. You were lucky if tracks ran near your property. If not, you'd swap your kingdom for a horse. In the first 18 months of Reconstruction, 15,000 horses died in harness. Contractors figured into their costs the value of the animals they knew they would have to work to death. Work on the streetcar system began at once. The United Railroad replaced cable systems with overhead wires for new electric trolleys. Only 10 days after the quake, Mayor Schmitz inaugurated service on the first line. People cheered as the car passed. Some forgot to move until almost too late. Thousands of laborers worked on restoring the lines. Within a few weeks, 225 miles of track were up and running. Newspapers proclaimed the rebirth of the city. A newspaper reporter asserted that
the business of San Francisco has not been destroyed, merely the business equipment. It's a free state, everyone beginning over again, rich and poor alike. The chief of police sits in the window of a corner grocery, and the relief committee is working 24 hours a day from the showroom of a vegetable grocer. Cooking their dinners in the streets may be seen girls who were educated at Stanford, Berkeley, Vassar, and Bryn Mawr. The loss of life is small. The loss of social position is colossal. Down to the elements now, nothing counts but human love. Humanity is on the flat, and everyone is on the level.
Within 6 months, the ranks of the building trades in the city doubled from 20,000 to 40,000. Working men and their families arrived from all over the nation. Popular postcards of the day featured the brick cleaner, the carpenter, and the steel girder man as the new heroes of San Francisco. A carpenter could make a fat wage of $4 a day. In New York City, lawyers were only making $1.50. The Chinese returned from segregated camps to survey what was once their home. In the next 3 years, Chinatown would be rebuilt, mostly by the Chinese themselves.
My father was so grateful that the family was intact and that we had suffered no great loss. And so he decided to follow the American custom of having a Thanksgiving dinner. And so he bought a turkey, a 20-pound turkey, and a portable oven, and roasted the turkey. And that caused quite a commotion among the people living in the tenement house because they never heard of such a thing. And but my father said, well, the American custom is to have a Thanksgiving celebration, and that's what we're doing.
$28,000 buildings had been destroyed. 3 years later, they would be replaced by 20,500 new ones. A completely new city rose up on the edge of the bay. The people of San Francisco shared a sense of triumph. They also shared a desire to erase the memory of the disaster and reassure themselves and the rest of the world that the new city was somehow invincible. They fought for and won the right to host the World's Fair of 1915. When the crowd entered the gates, it fell strangely silent. There was a benediction. To the city of St. Francis by the Western Sea, even the city's Chinese were invited. They staged a grand parade through the streets to the fair. The Italians staged their own event celebrating Columbus, the discoverer of America, and the great Italian patriot Garibaldi. Fatty Arbuckle and Mabel Normand, king and queen of the silent comedy, were welcomed by a new mayor on the steps of the half-finished City Hall, a symbol of reformed city government. The fair itself was designed to represent the complete development of human civilization up to present time. The wonders of modern technology were particularly reassuring. They seemed to demonstrate a triumph of man, over the forces of nature. The World's Fair's own fire department was supplied with the most modern equipment. The last of the old horse-drawn steamers had just been replaced the year before. Thanks to the new motorized fire trucks and the installation of high-pressure water mains in the city, people were confident that destruction by fire could never happen again. Tens of thousands came to San Francisco, in spite of the lingering worry that the city remained on shaky ground. In the end, there were no guarantees that the city was invincible. There was only the will and the example of the people themselves. Here was manifest an indomitable and impetuous spirit that, in the wake of disaster, had built an entire city and a World's Fair from the ground up.
It was fairyland. It was just like fairyland to me.
Those were the glorious years when I was 15, and it was just beautiful.
That was one of the most wonderful fairs I'll ever have anywhere.
Oh, that place? That's a nice place. And the only words that I could use, it was magnificent.